pretty general. I asked everybody this. What do you think sets Piedmont apart from, say, your average middle school?
Well, one thing is definitely the diversity that we have at Piedmont. We we bring in kids from we bring in kids from all different areas of the city with all different ethnicities and many different learning styles. I think that adds to the melting pot that we have here. And the unique thing about Piedmont is that all the kids are able to learn from each other, and everyone's differences are celebrated. People really aren't called out negatively for their differences. Everyone is looked upon in a positive light. So that's what I think really sets Piedmont apart from other schools.
All right, that's kind of what everybody said, actually. Like, not that's a bad thing. I was just saying, like, a lot of people said that. Um, what does Piedmont do for students that say what does Piedmont do to keep people in the game, so to speak? That makes any
Well,
sense.
I think our teachers and our administrative staff, we really take the time to number one get to know each kid and get to know their strengths and weaknesses, but also when kids need help, we sacrifice our planning periods to meet with the families and to meet with the students to try to learn what we need to do to help them academically, but also socially and any other area that they need help in. I mean, the teachers here go the extra yard. They do whatever it takes to make sure every kid is successful.
And this one is going to be a little bit more geared towards you. In your class, when I noticed that you put a big emphasis on competition, like with the vocabulary games, I know you do that, but I also know that one of the biggest things you do is you do the Pigman mock trial. Do you still do that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I do.
So what do you think that what benefits do you believe competition has in the classroom?
Well, I think the big thing, in seventh grade, you have to you have to find a way to motivate the kids. You have to make the kids want to engage in the lesson. And being a language arts teacher, there's not a ton of seventh graders who love to read. That's always a big hurdle, getting kids to engage in text and want to read and want to write. So for my very first year of teaching, it's always been like a challenge of mine to find a way to make kids, want to pick up a book and want to read the next chapter and want to find out about the character. So, I started the Pig Man trial when I was teaching in New York, and it was primarily for reluctant readers. It was for a lot of the kids who really didn't want to read and didn't find a benefit to reading. It made them want to come in every day and find out what's happening next in the chapter so they could win the trial. That's when the competitive part came in. The vocabulary game that you observe, that's just another way to kind of, I hate to use the word, but to manipulate the kids into learning the definitions and learning the meanings of the word. All the kids want to participate. They all want to play in the games. They all want to have fun. So, that's why I've kind of incorporated that element into my teaching style.
So it's more for like you need motivation for them to do this, but you feel like if you say you need to do this because it's a grade, you're gonna turn off a lot of people from doing it.
Exactly, exactly. Because
Yeah.
not all kids are motivated by grades. And, if I said that, right off the bat, I know that some kids would just turn off right away. But, if I said, okay, now we're doing this competition so you can, put a banner up on the wall and say that you are the weekly champion, or if I say, you're reading this novel so that you can win a field trip to the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, if you win the trial, that, raises their antennas, instead of turning kids off, it raises their antenna and it captures them. So that's the objective.
Do you think that that type of teaching style could be implemented on a larger scale for people that don't seem to be very motivated by grades? Say at like a larger middle school than sorry, than larger middle school in Piedmont, or maybe even high school like Mallard Creek or Hopewell or somewhere like that?
Absolutely, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be, a mock trial, but it can be, for any genre or any subject that you're teaching. Find a way to get the kids, engaged in it. And what I found is authentic assessment is the best way to do that. A paper and pencil test doesn't always show what a kid knows. Sometimes you have to put them like in a real life situation, and they're able to demonstrate comprehension of whatever skill you were trying to teach them. So I think regardless of the subject, and I think definitely on a larger scale, like in a bigger school, you can incorporate competition and you can incorporate more authentic assessment.
Well, I know you really you kind of broadly explained what you mean by authentic assessment, but could you explicitly say what you mean by authentic assessment? Like how would you if authentic if authentic assessment was in the dictionary, how would you define it?
Oh, it's assessing someone doing the skill rather than having them repeat the skill. Like, if I'm teaching making inferences, rather than having them write down the definition of what an inference is, and rather than having them, read a story and answer a question about inferences, I would have them, read the story and then demonstrate what they were inferring about the text and actually do it. Authentic assessment is more about, hands-on, engagement, like more real life, demonstrating that you understand the skill in real life. That's what authentic assessment is all about. Like you brought up the Pigman trial. Instead of them just reading and answering questions about the text, it's them digging deeper into the text and becoming the characters in the story and analyzing the story in a way that they will analyze things in real life. Some of these kids may end up being lawyers or witnesses in a trial. So authentic assessment is about it being real and making it relevant.
All right. So I imagine tactile learners do very well in your class then.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's hands-on. Like they're able to actually do it and they're able to actually be it rather than it just being told to them. And yeah, 100%. Yeah, they do better.
Do you think that, I mean, although it's very geared towards definitely more a tactile, definitely geared to more of a tactile learning style, do you think that it's a little bit more universal? Do you think anyone can learn it that way, or?
I mean that's the objective, but there's always going to be kids who struggle. There's always going to be kids who, no matter how you present the material to them, they're going to need more individualized attention to fully understand what you're talking about. So I would be wrong if I said it works 100% of the time for 100% of the kids. But through the course of my 17 years, I can say there's been very few students who don't respond to my teaching style.
Okay. Well, that's what everybody's always told me. They've always gotten a whole lot out of it. But you were talking about the ones that obviously don't have a little bit of harder time than other people do. What is done for them? Like what do yeah. What's some of them?
Well, an example would be in a standard class or in a standard plus class. I teach the same curriculum, but the speed is what is different. So the kids that are struggling, they get the material. I present the material in a different way. Rather than going through 2 chapters in a day, we'll do 1 chapter. Our note taking will be different. Maybe instead of them copying the notes off the board, I will give them the notes. Or it's the same material, but it's just done in in an honors class, uh, the students they take more responsibility for their education. And as a teacher, you don't have to say as much, or you don't have to do as much. They're going to engage more. But in a standard or a standard plus class, sometimes the kids make the teacher responsible for their education, which is, it's an entirely different approach that the teacher has to come with.
So basically the difference in from your honors to your standard class is honors, you teach it and they just they do what they will with it, and at the end of the day they learn the information, whereas in a standard class it's a little bit more methodical and drawn out.
That's one way of thinking about it, but I often tell people the big difference between honors and standard plus, it's not intelligence. I have standard and standard plus kids who are just as intelligent. No, the big difference is the kids taking responsibility for their education. If it's in an honors class, the students will come in right away, look up at the board, they will write down the homework in their agenda, they will get started on the opener right away. In a standard plus or a standard class, the kids will come in, they'll sit down, and they may start talking to a neighbor, or they may get distracted by something else, and then they will wait for the teacher to tell them what to do. And so that takes more time. So that's why, it often takes more time than in a lower level class. Not because the kids aren't bright enough, it's just that they don't always take full responsibility for their own education.
Yeah. That's kind of what I noticed in high school as well. What? Let me think. I was gonna ask like a follow-up question to that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that? Oh yeah, I know what I was gonna say. Do you think that the investment that Piedmont, without a doubt, Piedmont is very invested in their students, and they definitely put a lot of emphasis on their individual success and the individual plan they need for that success. Do you think the investment on the individual level, so the student knows you care about them, do you think that makes a difference in drawing out the intelligence from either from honors or standard plus or whatever type of class you're in?
Without a doubt, it's the kids knowing that you care about their well-being, in the long run, not just you care about them passing this test, it's you care about them passing all the tests, that they take. It's kind of like the whole saying, the kids don't care how much you know, they just care about how much, they just want to know how much you care,
Yeah.
And if they know you care, that's why in the beginning of the year, I always take so much time with get to know you activities. So they know that I care about them as an individual. Yes, of course, I would love for them to get, straight A's on all my tests, but I would much rather see them be successful beyond high school. I'd much rather instill in them the lessons that are going to make them lifelong learners and instill the lessons that are going to make them global citizens rather than instill the lessons that are going to just make them pass this week's vocab test. It's about caring about them, for the long haul. And, that's another reason why, I try to, keep tabs on how my students do beyond just the 7th grade. Like, I want to see what they're doing in high school. I want to hear about, what they're doing in college and things like that. And that's not just me. I think that's something that goes across the board with a lot of the teachers there at Piedmont.
All right, well, that's about it. So, thank you.